The 911 call came in at 2:47 a.m. on February 15, 2018. A man's voice, steady and controlled, reported that his wife had shot herself. But, as investigators would soon discover, the scene inside that modest military housing unit in Fort Carson, Colorado, told a very different story. One that would unravel the carefully constructed facade of a decorated Army specialist and expose a calculated murder that nearly succeeded. The caller was Colin Turner, a 24-year-old combat medic who had served in Afghanistan. His wife, Meghan Turner, just 19 years old, lay dead on their bedroom floor with a single gunshot wound to the head. Turner's explanation was simple. His young wife had been struggling with depression and took her own life while he slept beside her. But something wasn't right. And one detective's refusal to accept the obvious answer would lead to one of the most meticulous investigations in El Paso County history. When El Paso County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Turners' residence in the early morning hours, they found Colin Turner waiting outside, appearing calm and cooperative. Inside, the scene was grim. Meghan Turner lay on the bedroom floor, a gunshot wound to her right temple, a .40 caliber Glock handgun nearby. At first glance, it appeared to be exactly what Turner had described, a tragic suicide. The gun was positioned near her hand. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. Turner's story seemed plausible. He'd been asleep, heard a loud noise, woke to find his wife on the floor, checked for a pulse, and immediately called 911. But Detective Stephanie Nieblock, a veteran investigator with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, had learned to trust her instincts. And her instincts were screaming that something was off. The first red flag was Turner's demeanor. While everyone processes grief differently, Turner seemed remarkably composed for someone who had just lost his wife in such a traumatic way. His answers to preliminary questions were almost rehearsed, too precise, too controlled. Then there were the physical inconsistencies. Detective Nieblock began photographing and documenting every inch of the scene. The gun's position troubled her. While it was near Meghan's right hand, the angle didn't match what one would expect from a self-inflicted wound. The blood spatter patterns on the wall and floor seemed inconsistent with suicide. And there was something else. Something about the way Meghan's body was positioned that suggested she might have been lying down, possibly even asleep, when she was shot. Nieblock's partner, Detective Scott Williamson, noticed another crucial detail. There was no suicide note. While not all suicide victims leave notes, it was another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit, especially for someone as young as Meghan, who would presumably have wanted to explain her actions to her family. The investigators decided to proceed with caution. They would treat this as a potential homicide investigation while keeping their suspicions quiet. They needed evidence, and they needed to be absolutely certain before accusing a decorated soldier of murdering his wife. As detectives began piecing together Meghan Turner's life, a troubling picture emerged. The couple had married just 8 months earlier, in June 2017. Meghan, a Texas native, had moved to Colorado to be with Colin after a whirlwind romance. Friends and family described her as vibrant, outgoing, and deeply in love with her soldier husband, but that image began to crack under scrutiny. Detective Nieblock obtained Meghan's cell phone records and social media accounts. What she discovered painted a picture of a young woman trapped in an increasingly toxic relationship. Text messages between Meghan and her friends revealed that Colin had become controlling and possessive. He monitored her phone, questioned her about where she went and who she spoke with, and had recently become increasingly jealous. One particularly telling exchange occurred just 3 days before Meghan's death. She had texted her best friend back in Texas, "I don't know what to do anymore. He's getting worse. I can't even go to the store without him calling me 5 times." Investigators tracked down several of Meghan's friends for interviews. One friend, who asked to remain anonymous, revealed that Meghan had confided she was thinking about leaving Colin. She had been making plans to move back to Texas, possibly as soon as the following month. She hadn't told Colin yet because she was afraid of how he would react. This was significant. If Colin had discovered Meghan's plans to leave, it could provide a motive for murder. Detective Neblock needed to dig deeper into the couple's relationship and Colin's background. Colin Turner's military record was impressive on paper. He had served with distinction in Afghanistan, earning several commendations for his work as a combat medic. His superior officers described him as disciplined, skilled, and utterly committed to his duties. He was, by all accounts, an exemplary soldier, but military records only told part of the story. Detectives began interviewing Turner's fellow soldiers and friends. What they learned suggested a man with two very different faces. While Turner was professional and competent at work, his personal life revealed troubling patterns. Several people mentioned that Turner had a temper, though he was usually good at controlling it in public. One former roommate recalled an incident where Turner had put his fist through a wall after losing a video game. More concerning were the revelations about Turner's previous relationships. Detectives tracked down an ex-girlfriend from before his deployment to Afghanistan. She revealed that Turner had been emotionally abusive and controlling during their relationship. He had isolated her from her friends, monitored her communications, and once grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises during an argument. She had eventually gotten a restraining order against him, though Turner had claimed the allegations were exaggerated. This pattern of controlling behavior was crucial to the investigation. It suggested that Turner had the capacity for violence and a history of becoming dangerous when he felt a relationship slipping away from him. But Detective Neblock needed more than pattern evidence. She needed forensic proof that Meghan Turner hadn't killed herself. The forensic analysis became the cornerstone of the investigation. Detective Neblock worked closely with the El Paso County Coroner's Office and brought in forensic specialists to examine every aspect of the physical evidence. The autopsy results were the first major breakthrough. Dr. Leon Kelly, the chief medical examiner, found several inconsistencies with a suicide determination. The gunshot wound entered Meghan's right temple at a slightly downward angle, which was possible but unusual for a self-inflicted gunshot. More significantly, there were no gunpowder stippling or soot deposits on her skin, markers that are typically present when a gun is fired in contact or very close contact with the skin. This meant the gun had been fired from at least several inches away from Meghan's head, not the contact wound typically seen in suicides involving handguns. The blood spatter analysis proved even more damning. Forensic expert Rod Englert, brought in to analyze the patterns, determined that the blood spatter on the wall and floor was consistent with Meghan being in a prone, horizontal position when she was shot, most likely lying down in bed. The spatter pattern created a precise arc that allowed Englert to determine the position of the gun when it was fired. Additionally, there was a void in the blood spatter pattern, a clean area on the bed where something or someone had been positioned, blocking the blood. Englert believed this void represented where Colin Turner had been standing or kneeling when he shot his wife as she lay in bed. But perhaps the most significant finding came from gunshot residue analysis. When someone fires a gun, microscopic particles of primer residue are expelled and can land on the shooter's hands, face, and clothing. Meghan's hands had been swabbed for GSR at the scene. The results showed minimal residue on her right hand, far less than what would be expected if she had fired the weapon herself. Conversely, Colin Turner's hands and clothing had been swabbed during his interview at the sheriff's office. The results showed significant gunshot residue on both his hands and on his shirt sleeves, consistent with someone who had recently fired a weapon. The forensic evidence was building a compelling case, but Detective Neblock still needed to break Turner's story and find a way to prove that he had deliberately murdered his wife. While the forensic team worked on the physical evidence, Detective Williamson focused on the digital trail. In modern investigations, cell phones, computers, and internet searches often provide the most damning evidence, and this case would be no exception. A forensic examination of Colin Turner's laptop revealed a troubling search history. In the weeks leading up to Meghan's death, Turner had conducted numerous internet searches related to gunshot wounds, suicide statistics, and, most tellingly, how to make a murder look like a suicide. He had visited several websites discussing staged suicide scenes and had read forum posts about whether gunshot residue could be transferred to someone's hands after death. Turner had attempted to delete this search history, but forensic specialists were able to recover the data. The timestamps showed that many of these searches occurred late at night, when Meghan was presumably asleep. Even more significant was what investigators found on Turner's cell phone. He had been having an affair with a woman he had met online, a relationship he had been conducting entirely through a secret email account and encrypted messaging app. Text messages recovered from the app showed Turner telling this woman that he was planning to leave his wife soon, that his marriage was basically over, and that he just needed to handle some things first. The timeline was devastating for Turner's defense. Just 2 days before Meghan's death, Turner had texted his girlfriend, "Soon we can be together for real. Just need to take care of one last thing." The woman had responded, asking what he meant, but Turner never answered that question. Investigators also discovered that Turner had recently increased Meghan's life insurance policy to $400,000, a substantial sum for a young couple with modest means. The policy change had been made just 6 weeks before her death, and Meghan had been the one to sign the paperwork, though Turner had initiated the process. The insurance company confirmed that Turner was the sole beneficiary. Financial motive combined with opportunity was a powerful combination. But Detective Neblock wanted to understand the events of that final night more clearly. What had actually happened in those hours before Meghan Turner died? Through a combination of witness interviews, cell phone data, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses, investigators were able to piece together a detailed timeline of February 15, 2018, the last day of Meghan Turner's life. Valentine's Day had started normally enough. Colin had been off duty, and the couple had made plans to have a quiet dinner at home. Surveillance footage from a local grocery store showed both Colin and Meghan shopping together around 3 p.m. Body language experts later noted that in the footage, Meghan appeared withdrawn, while Colin seemed animated, at one point gripping her arm to steer her down an aisle. Text messages showed that around 6 p.m., Meghan had texted her mother, saying the evening was fine, but that she was tired and planned to go to bed early. This was notable because Meghan's mother later told investigators that her daughter had seemed subdued and had cut their text conversation short, which was unusual. The couple's neighbor, who lived in the adjacent unit of their military housing complex, provided crucial testimony. She reported hearing raised voices from the Turner residence around 9:30 p.m., a male and female voice, though she couldn't make out specific words. This contradicted Colin's statement that the evening had been peaceful and that they had both gone to bed around 10 p.m. without any conflict. Cell phone records showed that Colin's phone had been active until nearly midnight, with several texts sent to his girlfriend through the encrypted app. The last message, sent at 11:47 p.m., read simply, "Love you. Talk tomorrow." Then came the crucial gap in the timeline. Between midnight and 2:47 a.m., when Turner called 911, there was a black hole of information. No calls, no texts, no activity on either phone. Detective Neblock theorized about what had happened during those missing hours. Based on the forensic evidence, she believed that Meghan had gone to bed, likely falling asleep while Colin remained awake. At some point during those early morning hours, Turner had retrieved his service weapon, stood over his sleeping wife, and fired a single shot to her head. He had then carefully staged the scene to make it appear as a suicide, before calling 911 with his rehearsed story. The question was, could they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? Detective Neblock knew that getting a confession would be ideal, but she also knew that Colin Turner was intelligent, trained, and disciplined. He wouldn't crack easily. Nevertheless, she decided to bring him in for a formal interview once the forensic evidence had been collected and analyzed. On March 2nd, 2018, 15 days after Meghan's death, Turner was asked to come to the sheriff's office for a follow-up interview. He arrived with his military defense attorney, which was his right, but it also signaled that he understood he was under serious scrutiny. The interrogation room video, which would later be played at trial, showed a remarkably composed Colin Turner. Detective Neblock and her partner began with softball questions, allowing Turner to relax and repeat his version of events. Turner maintained his story. He had been asleep, heard the gunshot, woke to find Meghan dead, and immediately called for help. He claimed he had no idea his wife was suicidal, that their relationship was strong, and that her death had been a complete shock. Detective Neblock let him talk. Then she began to introduce inconsistencies. "Colin, I want to show you something," she said, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed the blood spatter void on the bed. "Can you explain what might have caused this pattern?" Turner studied the photo, his expression neutral. "I don't know. I'm not a forensic expert, but you are a medic," Neblock pressed. "You've seen gunshot wounds. Does this look like where someone would position themselves to shoot themselves in the head?" Turner's attorney interjected, but the seed had been planted. Neblock continued, methodically presenting piece after piece of evidence: the lack of contact wound, the gunshot residue findings, the internet search history. With each revelation, Turner's composure slipped slightly. His answers became more defensive, more evasive. When confronted with his affair and the secret messaging, he claimed it was just texting and nothing serious. When asked about the life insurance policy increase, he said it had been Meghan's idea, a claim that her family would later vehemently deny. The critical moment came when Detective Neblock asked Turner to explain his internet searches about staging suicides. "Those were for a story I was writing," Turner said, his voice tight. "A story? You're a writer." "I was thinking about it. Lots of people do research for fiction." "When did you start this story, Colin?" Turner hesitated. "I don't remember exactly. But you remember searching for information about how to make murders look like suicides." "I want to talk to my attorney," Turner said, and the interrogation was over. He hadn't confessed, but he had shown cracks in his armor. More importantly, his explanations for the evidence were weak and unconvincing. The investigators felt confident they had enough to proceed. For the next several months, the El Paso County District Attorney's Office worked with law enforcement to build an airtight case against Colin Turner. The challenge was that the case was entirely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon with Turner's prints alone. Both his and Meghan's prints were on the Glock, which made sense since it was his service weapon, and no confession. Prosecutors Amy Fitch and Jennifer Gerstner knew they needed to present a compelling narrative that connected all the evidence into an undeniable picture of premeditated murder. They brought in additional expert witnesses. A domestic violence expert would testify about the patterns of control and escalation in the Turner marriage. A digital forensics expert would walk the jury through Turner's damning internet searches. The blood spatter analyst would use computer simulations to demonstrate exactly how Meghan had been positioned when she was shot. The defense, meanwhile, began preparing their strategy. Turner's military defense attorney was eventually replaced by a private criminal defense lawyer named Robert Mosley, who had experience with high-profile murder cases. Mosley's approach was predictable but necessary. He would argue that the evidence was consistent with suicide, that Meghan had been depressed, and that investigators had rushed to judgment against a decorated veteran. To counter the internet search history, Mosley planned to argue that Turner had indeed been researching for a creative writing project. To explain the affair, he would characterize it as a young man's mistake that had nothing to do with murder. And for the forensic evidence, he would present his own experts who would offer alternative interpretations of the blood spatter and gunshot residue. The case was set for trial in November 2018. Both sides prepared for what would be a lengthy and technical presentation of evidence. The trial of Colin Turner began on November 5, 2018 in El Paso County District Court. Judge Lynn Billings Vella presided over proceedings that would last 3 weeks and feature testimony from over 40 witnesses. Jury selection alone took 2 days. Both sides were looking for jurors who could handle the technical forensic evidence and remain impartial about a decorated military veteran accused of murder. The final jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from 25 to 67. Prosecutor Amy Fitch delivered a powerful opening statement. She walked the jury through the timeline of the Turner marriage, from the whirlwind romance to the controlling behavior to the secret affair and the ultimate act of violence. This was not a tragedy, Fitch told the jury. This was not a young woman giving in to depression. This was cold, calculated murder. Colin Turner executed his wife while she slept because she was planning to leave him, and he couldn't accept that. He then tried to cover up his crime by staging it as a suicide. But the evidence, the science, tells the truth. And the truth is that Colin Turner is a murderer. Defense attorney Mosley countered with a different narrative. Meghan Turner was deeply troubled, he argued. She was young, far from home, struggling to adapt to military life. The prosecution wants you to believe that every Google search, every marital disagreement, every human failing adds up to murder. But the simpler explanation, the truthful explanation, is that Meghan took her own life in a moment of despair, and the authorities, unable to accept the tragedy, have decided to destroy another life by prosecuting an innocent man. The battle lines were drawn. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 2 weeks. They began with Meghan's family and friends, who testified about her personality, her relationship with Colin, and the changes they had observed in recent months. Meghan's mother, tearfully taking the stand, described her daughter as full of life, and insisted that Meghan would never have taken her own life. She testified about troubling phone calls in the weeks before Meghan's death, where her daughter had sounded strained and unhappy. She told me she made a mistake marrying him, the mother testified. She said she wanted to come home. She was planning to leave him. The defense objected, calling this hearsay, but Judge Vella allowed the testimony as evidence of Meghan's state of mind. Friends testified about Colin's controlling behavior, how he monitored Meghan's phone, demanded to know where she was at all times, and had become increasingly possessive. One friend described a double date where Colin had berated Meghan in front of others for laughing too loudly at another man's joke. Then came the forensic evidence, which occupied nearly a week of testimony. Dr. Leon Kelly, the medical examiner, explained in detail why the gunshot wound was inconsistent with suicide. Using anatomical models and diagrams, he demonstrated the angle of entry and the absence of contact wound indicators. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to get Kelly to admit that suicide was still possible, but Kelly held firm. In my professional opinion, based on 30 years of experience examining gunshot wounds, this was not self-inflicted. Rod Englert, the blood spatter expert, provided some of the most dramatic testimony. Using PowerPoint presentations and computer animations, he reconstructed the shooting scene. He showed the jury exactly where Meghan had been lying, where the gun had been positioned, and where the shooter had to have been standing. The void pattern in the blood spatter, he explained, was the smoking gun that proved someone else had been present during the shooting. This void here, Englert pointed to a blown-up photograph, represents a three-dimensional object that blocked the blood spatter. Based on the size and position of this void, I can tell you that it was made by a person standing right here, at this position relative to the victim. That person was holding the gun. The gunshot residue testimony was equally damaging. The forensic specialist explained that Meghan's hands showed minimal residue, while Colin's hands and clothing showed significant amounts. This pattern is consistent with Mr. Turner firing the weapon and the victim not firing it, the expert testified. The digital evidence came next. The forensic computer analyst walked the jury through Turner's search history, displaying the actual searches on large screens in the courtroom. How to stage a suicide. Can you transfer gunshot residue to someone's hand? Making murder look like suicide. The timestamps showed these searches occurring at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., late nights when Meghan was presumably asleep. Prosecutors then introduced Turner's affair into evidence. The girlfriend, a young woman who appeared devastated to be testifying, read portions of Turner's messages aloud. When she came to the message sent 2 days before the murder, "Soon we can be together for real. Just need to take care of one last thing," several jurors visibly reacted. The insurance policy evidence was presented through testimony from the insurance agent who had processed the policy increase. The agent confirmed that Colin had initiated the increase and that the $400,000 payout would have provided significant financial resources for a young enlisted soldier. Finally, Detective Neblock took the stand and walked the jury through the entire investigation. She explained her initial suspicions, the methodical gathering of evidence, and the mounting proof that this was not a suicide. The portions of Turner's interrogation were played for the jury, showing his evasive answers and ultimate refusal to explain the evidence against him. The prosecution rested their case after 12 days of testimony. They had presented a comprehensive scientific case that Meghan Turner had been murdered by her husband. Now it was the defense's turn to try to create reasonable doubt. Robert Mosley's defense strategy relied heavily on attacking the certainty of the forensic evidence and presenting an alternative narrative of a troubled young woman who had taken her own life. The defense began by calling several of Turner's military colleagues and superior officers. They testified to his excellent character, his dedication as a medic, his service to his country. They described him as disciplined, controlled, and utterly professional, not someone capable of murder. One officer testified that Turner had saved lives in Afghanistan and had always put others first. "He's a hero," the officer said. "The idea that he would hurt anyone, especially his wife, is incomprehensible to me." Mosley then turned to the forensic evidence, calling his own expert witnesses to counter the prosecution's scientific case. A defense forensic pathologist testified that while uncommon, the gunshot wound could have been self-inflicted. He suggested that Meghan might have held the gun at an awkward angle, which could explain the trajectory. Under cross-examination, however, Prosecutor Fitch got the defense expert to admit he had reviewed fewer than 50 suicide cases in his career, compared to Dr. Kelly's thousands of examinations. The expert also conceded he couldn't explain the lack of contact wound characteristics. The defense's blood spatter expert offered a different interpretation of the void pattern, suggesting it could have been created by Turner kneeling next to his wife after hearing the gunshot, trying to help her. This explanation, however, didn't account for the precise positioning and size of the void. Mosley addressed the internet searches by calling a digital forensics expert who testified that search history alone couldn't prove intent. "People search for all kinds of things out of curiosity," the expert said. "It doesn't mean they're planning to act on those searches." But the expert couldn't explain why Turner had deleted his search history or why the searches had intensified in the days immediately before Meghan's death. For the affair, Mosley argued it was evidence of marital problems, but not murder. "Young marriages fail all the time," he told the jury. "People have affairs. It's unfortunate, It's painful, but it's not evidence of murder. Colin was wrong to have an affair, but that doesn't make him a killer. The defense's most significant challenge was explaining the gunshot residue findings. Their experts suggested that residue could have transferred to Turner's hands when he checked Meghan for a pulse and handled her body. However, this didn't account for the residue on his clothing or the minimal amounts on Meghan's hands. Mosley chose not to have Turner testify, which was his right, but also meant the jury never heard Turner's own explanation for the evidence. In his closing argument, Mosley would need to tie together all these alternative explanations into a coherent narrative of reasonable doubt. The defense rested after just 4 days of testimony. The closing arguments brought everything into sharp focus. Both attorneys had one final chance to persuade the jury. Prosecutor Jennifer Gerstner delivered the state's closing argument, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence. She used a PowerPoint presentation to show the jury the timeline, the forensic findings, and the digital evidence, all pointing to one conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to use your common sense, Gerstner said. Colin Turner wants you to believe that all of this evidence, the blood spatter void, the gunshot residue, the internet searches about staging suicides, the affair, the increased life insurance, the victim's plans to leave, that all of this is just an unfortunate coincidence. That Meghan Turner, a vibrant 19-year-old woman who was planning to move back home to her family, somehow decided in the middle of the night to pick up her husband's gun and shoot herself in the head at just the right angle to create all these forensic anomalies. She paused, making eye contact with several jurors. And that's not what happened. What happened is that Colin Turner realized he was losing control. His wife was leaving him. His carefully constructed life was falling apart, so he made a choice. He waited until she was asleep, defenseless, trusting him, and he executed her. Then he staged the scene, called 911, and tried to get away with murder. Gerstner walked through the evidence one more time, emphasizing the scientific certainty of the forensic findings. The blood doesn't lie. The gunshot residue doesn't lie. The evidence tells the truth, even when Colin Turner won't. Defense attorney Mosley had a different message. His closing focused on reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. "The prosecution has presented you with a theory," Mosley argued. "It's a dramatic theory, a compelling story, but it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They want you to convict Colin Turner of murder based on interpretations of scientific evidence that other experts have told you could be interpreted differently, based on Google searches that could have been for any number of innocent purposes, based on a troubled marriage, which sadly describes millions of American households." Mosley emphasized the lack of direct evidence. There's no confession, no witnesses, no physical evidence that definitively proves Colin pulled that trigger. What you have is circumstantial evidence that the prosecution has arranged to tell their story. But you could arrange the same evidence to tell a different story, the story of a young woman struggling with depression who made a tragic choice. He reminded the jury of their awesome responsibility. You're being asked to convict a decorated combat veteran, a man who has served his country with honor based on speculation and interpretation. That's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not justice. The prosecution's rebuttal, delivered by Amy Fitch, was brief and powerful. The defense wants you to believe that we've constructed this case from thin air. But we didn't construct anything. We followed the evidence. We let the science lead us, and the science led us directly to Colin Turner, every single time. She displayed the photo of Meghan Turner on the screen behind her. Meghan deserves justice. She deserves the truth. And the truth is that the man she trusted, the man she married, the man who was supposed to protect her, murdered her in cold blood. Don't let him get away with it. The jury began deliberations on November 21st, 2018 at 2 p.m. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. During that time, they requested to review several pieces of evidence: the blood spatter photographs, the gunshot residue analysis, Turner's internet search history, and portions of Detective Neblock's testimony. The length of deliberation suggested the jury was taking their responsibilities seriously, carefully reviewing the extensive technical evidence. For the families on both sides, the waiting was excruciating. On November 24, 2018, at 4:30 p.m., the jury sent word to Judge Vella that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly as attorneys, family members, media, and spectators took their seats. Colin Turner sat at the defense table in his military dress uniform, his expression unreadable. Meghan's family sat in the front row of the gallery, her mother clutching a photograph of her daughter. Judge Vella asked the standard questions. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson confirmed they had. Is the verdict unanimous? It was. The court clerk took the verdict form and read aloud. In the case of the people of the state of Colorado versus Colin Turner, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Meghan's mother collapsed into sobs. Several family members embraced. Turner's face went pale, but he showed no other reaction. His parents, seated behind him, sat frozen in shock. Judge Vella gavelled for order and thanked the jury for their service. Turner was immediately taken into custody, handcuffed, and led from the courtroom. The jury had spoken. They had believed the evidence. They had found that Colin Turner had murdered his wife. The verdict represented the culmination of Detective Stephanie Neblock's meticulous investigation, the forensic team's scientific analysis, and the prosecution's methodical presentation of the evidence. Despite the lack of eyewitnesses or confession, the jury had found the circumstantial case compelling and the scientific evidence convincing. Colin Turner, the decorated army medic who had presented himself as a grieving husband, had been exposed as a calculating killer who had tried to stage the perfect crime. The perfect soldier had committed the imperfect murder, and the evidence, blood spatter, gunshot residue, digital footprints, and forensic science, had ultimately revealed the truth. As Turner was escorted from the courthouse toward a life behind bars, the case stood as a testament to the power of thorough investigation and forensic science in uncovering the truth, even when a killer tries to hide behind a carefully constructed lie.